The laughter. Oh, the laughter. It echoed in that sterile conference room, bouncing off the polished mahogany table and hitting me like a physical blow. Scott, my husband of 13 years, was leaning back in his chair, a smirk plastered across his face, his eyes glinting with a mix of amusement and absolute certainty. He thought this was a joke. He truly believed I was bluffing, that I was incapable of pulling the trigger on our marriage. Divorce? He chuckled, a sound that grated on my nerves like fingernails on a chalkboard. Alara, darling, don't be ridiculous. Where would you even go? What would you do? You wouldn't last a week without me. His voice, usually so charming and persuasive, was laced with a condescension that made my stomach churn. For 13 years, I'd heard that tone. For 13 years, I'd swallowed my pride, ignored the subtle digs, and pretended his casual cruelty was just his way. But not today. Today, that laughter was the final nail in the coffin of my patience. It was the sound of a man utterly convinced of his own untouchable power. A man who had systematically dismantled my self-worth piece by piece, brick by brick, until I felt like nothing more than a shadow in my own life. I didn't flinch. My hands, resting on my lap, were steady. My gaze, fixed on his arrogant face, was unwavering. I had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times in my head, each scenario playing out with me either crumbling into tears or exploding in a rage. But the real moment was different. It was quiet. It was cold. It was the calm before the storm. "I've already filed the papers, Scott," I said, my voice surprisingly level, a stark contrast to the earthquake rumbling inside me. "My lawyer has them. This isn't a negotiation. It's a formality." His smirk faltered, just for a fraction of a second. He leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "You're serious?" he asked, the amusement replaced by a flicker of irritation. "What is this, Alara? Some kind of midlife crisis? You want more attention? Because you know I'm busy. My career, my reputation." He always brought it back to himself, didn't he? Always his career, his reputation, his needs. My needs, my feelings, my very existence, were mere footnotes in the grand epic of Scott Sterling. He had built his empire, a successful marketing firm that specialized in brand image and crisis management, on a foundation of lies and manipulation, and I, unknowingly, had been one of his most effective and cheapest assets. I was the dutiful wife, the perfect hostess, the silent support system who made his public persona shine. And behind closed doors, I was the woman he systematically drained, financially and emotionally. I remember the first time I truly felt the chill of his disregard. It was our 10th anniversary. I'd planned a surprise trip, something small but meaningful, to the little bed and breakfast where we'd spent our honeymoon. I'd spent weeks saving, coordinating, dreaming of rekindling something that felt like it was fading. When I presented him with the tickets, his reaction wasn't joy or even gratitude. It was a dismissive wave of his hand. "Oh, Alara, that's sweet. But I can't. I have a major pitch that weekend. You know how important this account is." No apology, no suggestion to reschedule, just a casual dismissal of my effort, my love, my very presence. It was as if I were an inconvenient interruption to his magnificent life. That was just one drop in an ocean of subtle slights. The way he'd introduce me at parties. "This is Alara, my wife. She handles the house." As if my entire existence revolved around dusting and cooking, never mind my own degree in literature, my passion for writing, or the small online business I'd tried to launch, which he'd subtly sabotaged with 1,000 little criticisms until I'd given up. He saw me as an extension of his perfect life, a silent decorative accessory. He didn't see the woman who had stood by him through his early struggles, who had worked 2 part-time jobs to support us while he built his firm, who had believed in his dreams even when they seemed impossible. He didn't see the countless nights I'd spent awake, worrying about his late-night meetings, the increasingly distant look in his eyes, the way his phone was always face down, always locked. The tension in the room thickened. Scott's lawyer, Mr. Davies, a man whose face was as smooth and unreadable as a river stone, cleared his throat. "Mr. Sterling, Perhaps we should review the documents Ms. Vance has provided. Scott finally looked at me, a flicker of genuine confusion in his eyes. He must have expected tears, pleas, a dramatic scene. Instead, he got a woman who looked like she was ordering coffee. That, I realized, was what truly unnerved him. My calm, my lack of emotion. It was a language he didn't understand. "Documents?" he scoffed, but there was a new edge to his voice, a hint of something akin to unease. "What documents?" I reached into my oversized tote bag, the one I usually carried my laptop and notebooks in, and pulled out a thick, cream-colored envelope. It wasn't a legal brief, no official stamps or intimidating seals. It looked like a personal letter, perhaps a sentimental one. That was part of the design. I slid it across the table, pushing it gently until it rested directly in front of him. "Everything you need to know," I said, my voice still steady, almost a whisper. "And everything you've tried to hide." He picked it up, his brow furrowed, a flicker of annoyance still battling with the nascent fear in his eyes. He ripped open the seal, a crude gesture that spoke volumes about his impatience and his ingrained disrespect for anything I presented. He pulled out a stack of papers, neatly bound, and began to read. The silence that followed was deafening. It stretched, taut and suffocating, filling every corner of the room. I watched his face, every muscle, every twitch. The initial dismissive frown slowly morphed into something else. His eyes, darting across the pages, widened. His jaw, once so confidently set, began to slacken. The color drained from his face, leaving it a sickly, ashen gray. His breath hitched. He swallowed hard, his gaze fixed on a particular page, then another. His hands, which had been so casually holding the papers, began to tremble. The sound of the rustling paper was the only thing breaking the silence. A frantic, desperate sound. Then, the first gasp. A choked, guttural sound, like a man drowning. His eyes, now wide with panic, shot up to meet mine. The amusement, the certainty, the condescension, all gone. Replaced by pure, unadulterated terror. He looked like a cornered animal, stripped bare, exposed. "No," he whispered, his voice hoarse, barely audible. "No, you can't. You can't do this." But I could, and I would. The game, I knew, had just begun, and for the first time in a very long time, I felt a surge of something akin to power. It wasn't about destroying him, not really. It was about reclaiming myself, and watching the color drain from his face, seeing the fear in his eyes, was, I admit, a rather satisfying bonus. The first lie, the one that truly broke something inside me, wasn't even about another woman. It was about money. Scott had this uncanny ability to make me feel like I was financially illiterate, a child who couldn't possibly grasp the complexities of our shared accounts. He handled everything, of course. "It's easier, darling," he'd purr. "You worry your pretty little head about, well, whatever it is you do." What I did, for the record, was manage our household, volunteer at a local animal shelter, and try to maintain some semblance of a social life, all while quietly nursing the growing suspicion that something was fundamentally wrong. He'd always controlled the purse strings, even when I was the one bringing in a steady income from my freelance writing before his firm took off. He'd frame it as protection, a way to shield me from the boring bits. But it was control. Absolute, suffocating control. He'd give me an allowance, a meager sum that barely covered my personal expenses, and then subtly criticize me for any extravagance. "A new pair of shoes? Do you really need those, Alara? We're saving for the new wing on the house. A coffee with a friend? Are you sure you can't just make coffee at home? Every penny counts." Meanwhile, he was flying first class, dining at Michelin-starred restaurants, and buying expensive watches for himself. The real betrayal, the one that made my stomach clench with a cold dread, began subtly. It was a credit card statement, accidentally left on his desk. Not mine, but one with my name on it. A supplementary card I rarely used. The charges weren't mine. Lavish dinners, high-end jewelry, weekend getaways to resorts I'd never heard of. My heart pounded in my chest as I scrolled through the dates. They coincided with his business trips. Trips he'd always insisted were grueling, solitary affairs. I confronted him, of course. He laughed just like he did today. Alara, don't be absurd. Those are client expenses. You know I entertain clients. Sometimes they bring their wives, and I have to be hospitable. He'd flash that dazzling smile, the one that had once captivated me, and I'd want to believe him. He was a master of gaslighting, making me doubt my own sanity. You're imagining things. You're being paranoid. Are you feeling okay, darling? Perhaps you need a little vacation. He'd turn it around, making me feel guilty for even questioning him. But the seed of doubt had been planted, and it began to grow, watered by every late-night call he took in another room, every evasive answer, every sudden cancellation of our plans because of an urgent meeting. I started noticing patterns, the faint scent of a perfume that wasn't mine on his shirts, the casual mentions of new restaurants or boutique hotels he'd discovered on his solo trips. The worst part wasn't just the infidelity, it was the utter disregard for my feelings, my intelligence. He truly believed I was too naive, too trusting, too simple to ever connect the dots. He'd leave his phone in plain sight, knowing I'd never snoop. He'd talk about his female colleagues with a casualness that bordered on disdain, as if to imply they were utterly uninteresting to him. It was a performance, a carefully orchestrated charade designed to keep me in the dark, to keep me compliant. I remember one particularly humiliating incident. We were at a charity gala, one of Scott's big networking events. He was schmoozing as usual, and I was making polite small talk with a group of wives. One woman, a vivacious blonde in a stunning red dress, approached Scott, her hand lingering on his arm a little too long. "Scott, darling," she cooed, her voice dripping with familiarity. "That presentation last week was simply divine. You truly are a genius." Scott, ever the smooth operator, just smiled, a little too widely. "Ah, Jessica. Always a pleasure. So glad you enjoyed it." He didn't introduce me. He didn't even glance my way. He just kept talking to her, his back half turned to me, effectively making me invisible. I stood there, a silent, awkward appendage, feeling the eyes of the other wives on me, a mixture of pity and knowing glances. It was a public dismissal, a blatant declaration that I was irrelevant. That night, I cried myself to sleep, not just for the infidelity, but for the profound loneliness, the feeling of being utterly discarded by the person who was supposed to be my partner, my protector. I had given him my youth, my energy, my unwavering loyalty. I had supported his ambitions, sacrificed my own, and believed in his vision. And in return, I was a ghost in my own home, a financial pawn, and a convenient prop for his public image. The trigger phrase, the one that echoed in my mind constantly, was a silent scream. I gave him everything, and he discarded me like nothing. It wasn't just the money or the time or the emotional labor, it was my very essence. He had taken it all, chewed it up, and spit it out, leaving me feeling hollowed out, worthless. The pain was a constant companion, a dull ache that never truly subsided. It was the pain of a broken promise, a shattered dream, and the crushing realization that the man I loved, the man I had built a life with, saw me as nothing more than a disposable asset. But even then, amidst the despair, a tiny spark ignited, a spark of cold, hard resolve. I wouldn't be discarded, not anymore. The shift wasn't a sudden explosion of anger, but a slow, simmering burn. It began the day after the gala, when I woke up with a dry mouth and a resolve that felt like granite. I looked at myself in the mirror, really looked. My eyes were puffy, my face pale, etched with a weariness that went bone deep. I saw a woman who had been systematically diminished, her spirit dimmed. And in that moment, something clicked. The pain, the humiliation, the feeling of being invisible, it all coalesced into a singular, powerful force. Strategy. I didn't explode. I didn't confront him again. I became a ghost myself, but with a purpose. I started observing. I listened more, spoke less. I paid attention to the little things Scott did, the habits he thought were innocuous. His phone, always locked, but sometimes left charging on the kitchen counter while he showered. His laptop, occasionally left open on a financial spreadsheet. His casual conversations with his assistant, filled with coded language about client entertainment and off-site meetings. My first move was subtle. I started educating myself. I devoured books on forensic accounting, on digital privacy, on divorce law. I spent hours online, learning about hidden assets, shell corporations, and the legal implications of marital misconduct. It was like learning a new language, one that spoke of betrayal and deceit, but also of power and leverage. The more I learned, the more the pieces of Scott's elaborate puzzle began to fit together, revealing a much darker picture than I had ever imagined. I discovered that Scott wasn't just having affairs, he was using company funds, and even some of our joint savings, to finance his lavish lifestyle with these other women. He'd set up dummy corporations, ostensibly for consulting services, but in reality, they were conduits for siphoning money for his personal indulgences. He'd even taken out loans in my name, without my knowledge, leveraging our assets for his own clandestine ventures. The sheer audacity of it left me breathless, but also strangely calm. It was no longer just about a broken heart. It was about blatant financial fraud. I knew I couldn't do this alone. I needed an ally, someone discreet, professional, and utterly trustworthy. I remembered a conversation I'd had years ago with an old college friend, Clara, who had left her high-flying corporate job to become a private investigator specializing in financial fraud. We hadn't spoken in years, but I took a chance. I sent her an email, vague enough not to raise suspicion, asking if she was still in the business of finding lost things. Her reply was immediate. Always. What's missing, Alara? Clara became my silent partner in this clandestine operation. She was a whirlwind of efficiency, a woman who moved with the quiet precision of a predator. She taught me how to install discrete monitoring software on Scott's backup devices, how to recover deleted files, how to track digital footprints. She introduced me to a forensic accountant, a stern, bespectacled woman named Ms. Albright, who could sniff out a fraudulent transaction from a mile away. Together, we built a case, piece by painstaking piece. I started keeping a detailed journal, not of my emotions, but of facts. Dates, times, names, when I could get them. Financial transactions, email exchanges, text messages, every suspicious hotel bill, every unexplained cash withdrawal, every late-night phone call. I became a meticulous archivist of his deceit. I learned to copy documents, to take screenshots, to back up data to a secure cloud server that Scott would never find. I even started recording some of our conversations, particularly when he was being evasive about money or his whereabouts. It felt cold, calculating, almost alien to the woman I used to be. But the old Alara was gone. This new Alara was a strategist, a survivor. There was one particularly critical piece of evidence that I stumbled upon purely by accident, a stroke of dark luck. Scott had a safe deposit box, one he'd always kept secret, claiming it was for sensitive client documents. One day, while he was out of town, he called me in a panic. He needed a specific file from his home office safe, a file he said was critical for a last-minute presentation. He gave me the combination, something he had never done before. When I opened it, nestled among his business papers, I found a small unsealed envelope. Inside were copies of a prenuptial agreement, one I had never seen and certainly never signed, that purported to waive my rights to any of his assets, and a series of forged signatures, clearly meant to be mine, on various financial documents. It was a chilling revelation, a testament to the depth of his deception. He hadn't just been cheating. He'd been planning to leave me with nothing, legally. I photographed every page, then carefully put everything back exactly as I found it. My heart pounded, but my mind was clear. This was the smoking gun. The preparation was exhausting, emotionally draining, and terrifying. There were moments of doubt, moments when I wanted to give up, to just walk away with nothing and try to rebuild. But then I'd remember Scott's condescending laughter, the way he made me feel worthless, the years of quiet suffering. and the resolve would harden again. I wasn't just doing this for myself. I was doing it for the woman I used to be, the one he had tried to erase. The most satisfying part of the preparation was the realization that I was always 10 steps ahead. While Scott was busy living his double life, convinced of his cleverness, I was quietly dismantling his carefully constructed facade. He thought he was untouchable, a master manipulator, but he had underestimated the quiet woman he had tried to break. He had underestimated my capacity for patience, for meticulous planning, and for a cold, unwavering resolve. The pain hadn't broken me. It had forged me into something stronger, something sharper. And now, armed with a mountain of irrefutable evidence, I was ready to deliver the final blow. The air in the conference room was thick, almost suffocating. Scott, still reeling from the initial shock of the envelope, was now frantically flipping through the pages. His face, once so confident, was a mask of disbelief and dawning horror. Mr. Davies, his lawyer, leaned over, trying to get a glimpse of the documents. "What is this, Alara?" Scott choked out, his voice rising in pitch. "What have you done?" I watched him, a strange calm settling over me. It was the calm of a surgeon before an intricate operation, every move precise, every word measured. "It's simply a comprehensive overview, Scott," I replied, my voice devoid of emotion, "of our 13 years together, or rather, your 13 years of extracurricular activities and financial innovations." He found the section on the forged documents, the fabricated prenuptial agreement. His eyes bulged. This is impossible. These are lies. You forged these," he shrieked, his composure completely dissolving. His voice was no longer a chuckle, but a desperate, raw cry. "You can't do this! You can't! My career! My reputation! This will destroy me!" Mr. Davies finally managed to grab a few pages. His own face, usually impassive, now showed a flicker of alarm. He saw the bank statements, the detailed logs of hotel stays, the receipts from high-end boutiques, all cross-referenced with dates and names. He saw the forensic accountant's report, detailing the shell corporations and the diverted funds. And then, he saw the copies of the forged signatures, complete with expert analysis proving their inauthenticity. "Scott," Mr. Davies said, his voice low and urgent, "we need to talk. Now." But Scott wasn't listening. He was on his feet, looming over the table, his eyes wild. "Alara, please. We can fix this. This is a mistake. Think about what this will do. My clients, my investors, everything I've built." He was pleading now, his voice cracking, the arrogance replaced by abject terror. The man who had laughed at my pain was now begging for mercy. It was a sight I had dreamed of in my darkest moments, and it was even more potent in reality. "You should have thought about that, Scott," I said, my voice cutting through his panic like a scalpel. "When you were taking out loans in my name without my knowledge. When you were siphoning off our joint savings to fund your other life. When you were forging my signature on documents that would have left me destitute." I paused, letting my words sink in. "You thought I was too stupid to notice, didn't you? Too naive to understand what you were doing. Too weak to fight back." A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched my lips. "That was your biggest mistake." I reached into my bag again, this time pulling out a single, pristine white envelope. "This," I said, sliding it across the table, "is the proposed settlement. It's fair. It's equitable. It ensures I am compensated for the financial damage you've inflicted, and that I retain my rightful share of the marital assets, as well as the intellectual property you tried to claim as solely yours." Scott stared at the envelope, then back at the stack of damning evidence. His chest heaved. He looked from the documents to me, then to his lawyer, who was now shaking his head almost imperceptibly. The message was clear. There was no way out. The evidence was overwhelming. "Sign it, Scott," I said, my voice firm. "Or this entire dossier, complete with the forensic reports and the sworn affidavits from the private investigator, goes directly to the authorities. And to the press. I assure you, your reputation won't survive that." His face contorted in a silent scream. He wanted to lash out, to deny, to fight, but he was cornered. He knew it. The man who had always been so meticulously in control, so adept at spinning narratives, was now utterly exposed. His carefully constructed facade had crumbled, revealing the pathetic, desperate man beneath. He looked at Mr. Davies, a desperate plea in his eyes. His lawyer, a pragmatist if nothing else, gave him a curt nod. "Scott," he said, his voice flat, "I advise you to consider Ms. Vance's proposal very carefully. The evidence here is substantial." Scott's shoulders slumped. The fight had drained out of him, replaced by a chilling realization of his impending downfall. The man who had laughed at me, who had dismissed me, who had systematically tried to erase me, was now utterly at my mercy. And I, for the first time in a very long time, felt a profound sense of triumph. Not a vengeful, destructive triumph, but a quiet, powerful reclaiming of my own life. The battle wasn't just won, it was decisively over, and I had emerged, not unscathed, but undeniably victorious. The months that followed were a blur of legal proceedings, but the outcome was never in doubt. Scott signed the settlement agreement, his hand trembling as he affixed his signature. The terms were exactly as I had outlined: a significant portion of the marital assets, compensation for the diverted funds, and a clear separation of our professional interests. He avoided public humiliation, but his career took a significant hit. The whispers started, the subtle shifts in client loyalty, the sudden lack of high-profile invitations. His carefully cultivated image, though not publicly shattered, began to fray at the edges. He was no longer the golden boy, he was merely Scott Sterling, a man whose personal life had become a liability. For me, the divorce wasn't just a legal document, it was a declaration of independence. The moment the judge's gavel fell, a weight I hadn't realized I was carrying lifted from my shoulders. It wasn't an immediate magical fix. The emotional scars ran deep. There were days when the memories of his casual cruelty would resurface, a phantom ache in my chest. But those days became fewer and farther between. I moved into a small, sun-drenched apartment downtown, a space that felt entirely mine, free from the ghosts of a broken marriage. I started writing again, not just for myself, but for a small online publication focused on empowering women. My articles, initially tentative, became bolder, more insightful, drawing on my own experiences to offer advice and support to others navigating difficult relationships. It was cathartic, a way to transform my pain into purpose. I reconnected with old friends, some of whom admitted they had always suspected something was amiss with Scott, but hadn't known how to approach me. Their quiet support became a balm for my wounded spirit. I even started taking art classes, something I'd always wanted to do but had put off because Scott deemed it impractical. I discovered a hidden talent for abstract painting, finding a new form of expression that allowed me to channel my emotions onto canvas. My confidence, once shattered, began to rebuild itself piece by piece. It wasn't the naive, trusting confidence of my youth, but a stronger, more resilient kind, forged in the crucible of betrayal and survival. I learned to trust my instincts, to recognize red flags, and most importantly, to value my own worth, independent of anyone else's validation. Scott, I heard through the grapevine, struggled. His firm lost a few key clients, his social circle dwindled, and the women he'd once so casually entertained seemed to have moved on. He was a man accustomed to being admired, to being at the center of attention, and the quiet erosion of his status was, I imagined, a far more potent punishment than any public scandal. He was left with the hollow echo of his own arrogance, a man who had everything but lost the one thing he truly needed: respect. Sometimes I'd see him from afar, perhaps at a coffee shop or walking down the street. He looked older, more tired, the lines of worry etched deeper into his face. There was no triumph in my heart when I saw him, no desire for further vengeance, just a quiet sense of peace. He was no longer a threat, no longer a shadow over my life. He was just a man, diminished by his own choices, and I was free. My journey wasn't about destroying Scott. It was about rebuilding Alara. It was about proving to myself that I was strong enough, smart enough, and resilient enough to not only survive, but to thrive. The laughter that had once haunted me, the laughter of a man who thought he had won, had been replaced by the quiet hum of my own life, a life I was finally living on my own terms. And as I sat at my desk, sunlight streaming through the window, working on my next article, I knew one thing for certain. Some battles aren't won with noise and fury, but with the silent, meticulous crafting of your own undeniable truth.